Hi, thank you ever so much. It's lovely to see you all here today. We were talking a little bit earlier about how it's a difficult topic to be very upbeat about, but I will try to be positive about this topic. And I think it's an opportunity for us to all together to kind of think of creative and positive ways of addressing online abuse in our communities. So let's think positive right at the beginning. Okay, so I've been an educational technologist for a long time, and like many of you in the room, I started at the beginning of my career spending a lot of time telling people the internet is coming. Everybody's going online, everybody's buying mobile phones. This is going to have implications on how we live our lives. This is going to change how our day-to-day activity is, how we move around. So this is a kind of tipping point slide. So this is from way back in 2007. And this was the first time that visits to social network services overtook visits to webmail. So a really kind of key moment in the history of online engagement, online discussion, how people connected to each other. And you'll notice it happened around Christmas. So people were enjoying their Christmas dinners with their families, and instead of sitting down talking to their families, they were on social networks talking to other people, or if they couldn't be with their families, they were talking to their families through social networks. So that really was the change, and a lot of us have spent a lot of time since that point basically saying, well, okay, so this has happened now. What are we going to do about the kind of the changes that it's brought about, and the different ways that people work, live, organise their lives in relation to technology? In 2007, we already had quite a significant cyberbullying issue globally. It wasn't a new thing by that point. I talked to a lot of young people at both secondary and primary school, so quite young children, and reports around cyberbullying were really, really common. Had a lot of parents having problems as a result of cyberbullying, and young people suffering as a result of seeing their parents being involved in cyberbullying incidents. Had a lot of incidents taking place within schools, within school networks, and outside of school, and also obviously with older learners at FE and university. So the first guidance really looked specifically at these three key issues: understanding cyberbullying, so the kind of importance of talking with your community and developing a shared definition and appreciation and understanding of what you mean by online abuse or cyberbullying or whatever it is, because very often we take for granted that people immediately understand what we mean by those things, and from our conversations with young people, that's not the case at all, and also with adults. Lots of people have very different views of what it is. Lots of people have kind of misconceptions about it. The other two sections were looked in detail about what to do within your education community to prevent cyberbullying, and what to do when incidents occurred to respond to them. So this is a definition, for those of you who haven't seen a recent definition, that we've used for the most recent guidance. The use of technologies by an individual or a group of people to deliberately and repeatedly upset someone else. And there's strong links, obviously, there to the standard definitions around bullying, with the added use of technology. And it includes a whole range of behaviours and activities that are either unwanted, unpleasant, or very often actually illegal as well. A couple of things I'm going to pick out that are kind of more recent issues and quite concerning are things around doxing. So if people know what that is, it's basically where information that you have made available about yourself online is taken and then delivered to other people to do things with. So for example, if I buy a URL for my site, I register a URL, and for that URL site, I give my name, my home address, my telephone number. Now, if I don't check and I don't actually pay extra to have that information kept private, people can actually just look that up. They can look that up online, they can find out what my home address is, and if they want to, they can publish that. And obviously, I'm going to talk a little bit about Gamergate later on, because it's fairly inevitable, but that was one of the key tactics used within that, and it's obviously, it's not illegal to do that because you have made that information publicly available about yourself, but it's also very upsetting, it's very concerning, and it makes people feel extremely vulnerable. So 2016, we've brought out the new guidance. So this is for ChildNet International. It's been funded by the Government Equalities Office in the UK. And it's changed. It's changed in a few ways. Some of the key ways that it's changed has got to do with the changing face of legislation, policy, guidance in our country. And my apologies that I'm talking specifically about the UK, but I am aware that many, many of these things are happening right across Europe and will have, and the wider world, and will have relevance to people in the room. So the Equalities Act 2010 strengthened issues around hate speech and hate crime in our country. Other countries in Europe actually had stronger rules around this previous to our legislation. So-called revenge porn legislation came into being, which is, I think, a very positive piece of legislation, which basically means that it is not legal for you to publish adult pictures that have been sent to you of people in sexual poses without their explicit permission. So it basically criminalises what had been going on in terms of blackmailing people and harassment. New guidance was has been pushed out in the UK about youth-produced sexual imagery, because obviously it's a fine line to walk between criminalising young people's behaviour and protecting and supporting young people in dealing with incidents that they're involved in. So we've recently announced new guidance around that area to try and encourage schools and young people to talk more about what it is that they're going through. There's obviously new anti-extremism statutory requirements right across the board, and they affect, in our country, filtering and monitoring requirements for any educational provider, and also austerity. And that has mainly impacted the guidance by, the previous guidance came in about 54 pages, I think, and this one's just under 20 pages. So we've cut down and we've trimmed the fat out of the advice. One of the key changes from the guidance this time round is a focus on discrimination, hate speech, and hate crimes. That's very much changed. So the guidance in 2007 was very much focusing on introducing technology, introducing online behaviours to educators, talking about the fact that actually things that happen online can be just as devastating as things that happen offline, talking about how to deal with them in different ways. Much more of a generic kind of approach. This time, actually, the guidance has focused very sharply around specific around discrimination, and sometimes around actual hate crimes as well, because these groups are disproportionately affected by cyberbullying. So why should education providers care about this? Why should you as an educator care? First of all, there's a whole raft of kind of legal issues that providers have to take account for, that are there to hold you to account for your learners and for employees as well. It's about a duty to protect students. It's about looking after the health and safety of your employees, very specifically, and it's about providing a safe environment for learning, and that safe environment for learning has now extended. So whereas before, when we thought about safe environments for learning, we were talking about bricks and mortar, now we're also talking about digital and online environments that we are providing for our learners, or that our learners are using in the course of their studies. Other really key reasons is obviously it can involve all members of your community. This isn't just a thing between young people. Very often it's between adults, or between adults and young people as well. there's a huge variance in terms of statistics around impact, but around roughly 1 in 10 people are reporting that they've been affected by cyberbullying. Interestingly, face-to-face bullying seems to have decreased, while online bullying seems to have increased in recent years. Huge amount of short-term effects and long-term effects. And long-term effects are not just psychological, they're also physical, they're also social, and they're also economic, long-term effects of bullying. So that it has a huge, huge consequence on life outcomes and expectations of people. And as I said before, there are a group of people who are being disproportionately affected. The theme for this year is owning learning, really. And the question in terms of online abuse is how do we ensure that our approaches to supporting inclusivity and ownership of learning are actually empowering? So how do we ensure that we're not just protecting people, that we're preventing things from happening, but actually that we're empowering our learners and our staff to tackle things effectively? And I'm just going to finish with a few ideas for you. I'm really looking forward to hearing what your ideas are, the things that you might be involved in, the things that you're interested in kind of pursuing. First of all, obviously, an idea around digital literacy, digital competencies. This is JISC's digital competency framework, and within the framework is included digital well-being. Most digital competency frameworks will include something around online behaviour, e-safety, digital well-being, in recognition that actually it's an important part of the puzzle. Increasingly, we're seeing the adoption at institutional level and at the level of professionalism of digital competency. And obviously, within and across curriculums, young people need specific information, literacy skills. They need related digital literacy skills as well. And we can't support young people without being able to have confident educators. One of the things that young people have told us repeatedly, the reason that they don't report instances of abuse is that they don't believe that the adults will understand what it is they're talking about. So they don't think that they can just go to somebody and say, this has happened to me. They think they're going to have to actually explain to that adult, this has happened, I went online, this is what happens in these online environments, then this happened, then this. And they just haven't got the energy. They haven't got the energy to explain themselves and to try and frame the support that they actually need. So it's really, really important that we as educators are kind of confident in this area and modelling that and communicating that to the learners that we come into contact with if we actually want to support within our communities. How long have I got left? Perfect. Okay, so I won't talk about Gamergate for too long. Can I ask who in the room is aware of Gamergate? Okay, a few. Who in the room feels like they lived through Gamergate? Okay. Okay, so I think it would be really, really useful for you to find out a little bit more about what went on with this. So this was in 2014. You can find out from lots of different sources about Gamergate. I've put up Wikipedia's definition. It's a very interesting exercise in your own digital literacy to shift through the different accounts that you will find if you type in Gamergate online and the different kind of perspectives that you'll come across as to what the Gamergate controversy was about, what it meant, what the impact of it was, who was involved, who was to blame for it. Essentially, it was a group of a disparate group of people who were explicitly protesting ethics within the gaming industry and poor ethics within the gaming industry. How it transpired, though, was that several key women who were involved in the gaming industry got attacked very, very explicitly online, and they received death threats. They had their information doxed. They had people threatening to go to talks that they were going to harm them. They had to sometimes physically leave the places that they were because they actually were afraid for themselves and their families. And it's important, I think, to know about Gamergate because it feeds in, I think, to some of what's going on at the moment in online environments and some of what people seem to think that it's actually acceptable to talk about and the ways that it's acceptable to talk to people online. And some of the kind of framing that's going on around freedom of speech and also misinformation too. It kind of feeds into all of these issues that are around. Caitlin Dewey at the time for the Washington Post wrote that Gamergate is not about video games. It's a proxy war for a far bigger cultural battle over inclusion and diversity, over space and visibility and inclusion, a battle over who belongs to the mainstream. In addition to kind of digital literacy approaches that we can take, some groups of activists have also taken work into their own hands and actually provided tools and information for other people. So Feminist Frequency is actually made up of some of the women that were affected explicitly by Gamergate. And their site, Speak Up and Say Safer, is a great source of information for people that talks about things like protecting yourself from doxing, talks about the more technical aspects of keeping yourself safe online, as well as the kind of wider impacts of looking after yourself. The Tactical Technology Collective as well. I don't know if many of you are aware of them. They're a European-based collective. They're doing some great stuff, and they are also interested in this area of digital security and privacy and doing some really interesting work and taking a very interesting route in to looking at how we actually empower people to look after themselves without being overly protectionist. One other thing that I'd ask you to think about is in an organisational context are these two issues. So all websites, as you know, they will have a terms of service. They're typically the things that people don't read and just click. Organisations have a similar thing. They will have the rules that you are abiding by when you use their computers, when you're online. In addition to that, they'll also have professional guidance for employees about what you can and can't do within your role as a professional. And they typically increasingly have kind of similar rules for learners and young people as well about what the kind of expected standards of behaviour are for those people. They're all kind of terms of service. I think you can put them in the terms of service basket, and you can think variously about how many people know what those rules are and how many people have bothered to read through those rules and understand them and actually taken them to heart. It's important that we have kind of a clear policy and expression of what is and isn't permissible, particularly when it comes to employment law. But at the same time, what is really important is that we have an accessible dialogue for our community to contribute to what that actually means and how we go forward in that. So that's the idea of this community guidelines. Many websites will have community guidelines. Increasingly, universities and other educational institutions will have community guidelines. And basically, it is the version that people actually read and know about and understand, and hopefully the version that the community have been involved in developing and creating around what is acceptable within your community and what's not acceptable in your community. So I'll leave you with those a few approaches to think about, and I will thank you for your time.